Welcome, everyone, to the Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir virtual live signing event. My name is Ben Opapari. I am the with credit in the book. The book is Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Ben Opapari. I'm here with the man himself, Mark Morton. Mark, how you doing?
What's up, Ben? Thanks
Good.
man. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to answer some fan questions, but first, Mark and I are going to talk about the process behind the book and how we did all this, and just kind of make this more of a free-flowing conversation. So first, if you have not gotten the book, I'm biased, of course, but it's great. If you're watching on Facebook, comment the word buy to receive a link in your DMs to purchase. If you're on TalkShop Live, press the buy button, or if you're on X or Instagram, please purchase there at desolationbook.com. So Mark, I guess, and also one more thing, that this live signing event is a great way for you to purchase a signed copy of the book if you don't already have one. There's still some available, so make sure that you purchase it. So Mark, let's maybe you and I talk for a few minutes about why or how. I know I've read other interviews and people talking about like how we decided to write the book and why you decided. So tell the story, man. What were we thinking, I guess, is the real question.
Okay, first, we'll go back a little bit further, and I'll try and just give a quick synopsis. So, Ben, you and I have been friends for some time. I believe we met through your project,
Songwriters on Process. That's my podcast. Thanks for the plug.
Which was an interview I did several years back, about the process of songwriters on process. And it was a great interview. And it was such a great interview that when I did my anesthetic solo record, I requested you to write my bio, which you did a bang up job on that as well. It's worth noting that Ben is an English professor, among other things. It's fair to say you teach attorneys how to write. So then Ben and I became friends. He has a lovely beach house down in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, an area that I frequent as well. And we were sitting on Ben's back patio and talking about ideas. And he more or less challenged me, nudged me to write a sample chapter of a book. And I accepted that challenge from my friend Ben, the English professor, just to see really if I could do it, which is a pretty fair assessment of everything I've ever done career-wise. Let me just see if I can do this. Even going back to when I was a roofer, which I talk some about in the book, terrified of heights, got a chance to take her on a roofing job. And I said, well, let me see if I can do this. So fast forward years later, where I was challenged to write a chapter of a book, wrote it, Ben cleaned it up for me, and we submitted it. And now this week we have a book coming out a couple of years later. So that is, I think, a start for our conversation.
That's a good start. And I think it's fair to say this is the first English PhD metal guitarist book collaboration out there. This could be the first one.
First that we know of. Let us know if there are anyone watching that knows of others.
Certainly. So, one of the things that you and I talked, and I'll just touch briefly on how we did this. Mark would send me chapters, and we went back and forth probably 2 or 3 times on each chapter, just kind of going back and forth. I live in the DC area, Mark's in Richmond, so I would drive down there. We met where I lived. We met at the beach house. Like, we had all these meetings, but we were in constant contact. For probably, I think it took us 1.5 or 2 years to write this thing, but we were in constant contact going over things.
With progressive momentum, I think when you look at 2 years to write a book, you think it's a lot, and then you get 8-9 months into it and have 3 or 4 chapters. And at one point I did the math on how many words a week I had to be writing to make my deadline. And it was, you probably remember that realization. It was a little bit terrifying, but we did it. And what I think one of my big takeaways from this, and one of the things I'm really excited about this, among a long list of things, is that you and I, even when we had finished and completed the book, remained friends. In fact, I would say we're probably better friends than we were when we started as a result, which, you know, there were points in the process where I'm sure that I was driving you absolutely insane because it's, I don't know, as I'm not the easiest person to be in a creative interaction with, creative dialogue with, and Ben was on the giving and receiving end of all things related to that.
We talked constantly, but I think also it's funny you say that because I kept on thinking during the time. I mean, Mark was writing this book when he was on tour. He was in buses, hotel rooms. Like Mark was finding it's easy for someone who writes full time, to take the 6 hours a day to write. Mark was really doing this in between things that he was doing. So to ask someone who has a full time job to do this, to write a book on top of that, all the spaces he was able to carve out minutes here and there. I always thought, I said to Mark, you've got to hate me by now that I've ever mentioned that we should do this. And I think the fact is funny that you were saying that about me. I'm thinking that guy's got to hate me now. But I do think, if I will say this, I think we've become, much better friends in this process. But I think what made it work was that you and I were completely open with each other about feedback. I never got the sense that I didn't hold back, you didn't hold back. And I think that's what made it, such a great partnership, was that, in a collaboration, was that we really always, we were completely open and honest. And I will say this, and I've said this to Mark personally, Mark, working with Mark has made me a better person. And really, I think if you read the book, you'll see that too. But working with Mark and the things he says has made me a better person. So I do have to put that out there for you too.
Well, that's very kind. And I wouldn't have wanted to do this with anyone else. And it was a great experience. I wish that I had kept track of how many countries I wrote in. Or how many states. I did write this over the course of several tours and lots of work. As most people watching, I travel pretty extensively in the context of my career, and I was having to write on days off. And I've joked with Ben, and it's true. To this day, when I check into a hotel room on a day off from tour or whatever I'm doing, I have this sort of mini anxiety attack about, okay, how many chapters do I have to write before I check out of this room? Because I would spend my days off on tour just like writing away. It wasn't, I don't want to characterize it as being traumatic. It was just a mountain of work that I didn't necessarily have a point of reference to realize how much work it would be. But it's been an awesome experience writing the book. And I think more than anything, for me personally, my takeaway is that it has allowed me to make friends with the version of myself that I discuss in some of the more difficult chapters of the book. New York City is New York Citying right now, so maybe everyone can hear that. But yeah, so anyway, it really it wasn't as much a catharsis as it was sort of a big hug to myself through some of the more challenging times. That's been a real positive for me.
And let me ask you this, because I saw this, we've talked about this, how if we could look at the first chapter that we ever put together compared to the last one that we put together, your evolution as a writer. I remember thinking towards the end of the process, thinking, damn, like Mark's a writer now. Like there was so much of a huge difference. I saw it, that the evolution of you as a writer. So I'm curious if you also saw that too and feel that, that you've become a better writer. I certainly noticed it.
I think it was a little more of a kind of blinders on situation for me, whereby I was learning to write to avoid your notes. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just knew by the end what notes and what kind of feedback on the actual writing I was going to get from you. So I became able to anticipate that and hear your voice in my head. And it's in a lot of ways, it's like recording and being a, recording music and songwriting. where I have worked with producers enough where I can anticipate what a producer is going to tell me about an idea or about a performance or about a particular take or about a melody line or about a song structure or whatever. I can begin to hear people whose opinion I respect and who help guide me. I can hear what they're going to say about it before, as soon as I step back and listen to the work or read the piece, I can hear what you're going to say. And so I began to anticipate that direction that I was getting from you. And I think in that sense, you taught me to be a writer.
And also, I think that, well, actually, let me ask you this, because I think one of the strengths of our process was that we didn't really have a direction. And I mean that as a strength. I don't think when we set out to do this, it was, here's where we are, we're going to get here, and let's do what we can do to get us there. Is it fair to say that the book, the direction evolved in, it went several different ways before we got to the end? I don't think we ever thought, here's what we want it to look like. But I think that was the strength of the process, was that we let it take us where we felt it should take us.
For sure. I don't think the book we initially started out thinking we were writing is the book that we wound up with. Again, my points of reference are always music, because that's really what I do. And I have learned, and it took me a long time as a songwriter and as a musician and as a recording artist to know that what I end up with is very often not what I thought I was sitting down to, or, standing up, or whatever I'm doing, whatever I was, plugging in to create. And I think when you are at your best is when you are allowing a piece of art to become what it wants to be. It's like the old sculptors would say, they just chisel away and let what comes out, you know what I mean? And some of that stuff is a little corny, but I mean, as a creative, I think it's true. And I think the book was very much that way, where I would sometimes sit down and know kind of a time frame I was writing about, but I would really just sort of vomit onto the page and then step back and read what I got and see what's poking out, and then try and refine that a little bit, and then hit you with it and see if you liked it,
Well, the first chapter we wrote was the Opium Caper chapter. I mean, that was the chapter the first one we ever did, and that takes place towards the end of the book. But my God, if you look at that first version of that chapter, totally different, right?
We kind of had to go through and rewrite some of it because of the style and the voice of my writing had changed so much that we had to, there was a year and a half between the time we wrote that and the more recent stuff. So it sort of had to, it had to get repolished, so to speak.
Yeah. So as a reminder, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir, is out now everywhere by Mark Morton with me, Benno Papari. If you're watching on Facebook, comment the word buy to receive the link in your DMs to purchase. If you're on Talk Shop Live, press the buy button. Or if you're watching on X or Instagram, please purchase at desolationbook.com. A couple more questions. We'll get some fan questions. One of the things that I love about the book is, and let's talk about this, the songs at the beginning of each chapter. And because I think, if I recall, our earliest idea was make it like a mix, like not a mixtape, but like, I think I'm pretty sure that the original version of this was like each chapter was a song and talking about how the song was a part of your life or something like that.
Yeah, that was one of the ideas that we were tossing around in the very beginning, and then that turned into just having a little separate section, as is in the book, as it wound up being, where I talk about a song and its relevance to my life. And for the most part, those songs, in fact, entirely, those songs do tie into something in the chapter that they're in front of. And that was there was some debate amongst all the parties involved in making this book of whether or not that would make the cut, whether it was necessary, whether it added or detracted. And I think in the end, once everyone kind of read it and sort of understood how it fell into play, it wound up being a cool, unique part of the book, and I think an asset to the overall read. And I think for me, it really represents in a very, very real way how, music is really the language I speak. So every era of my life, and when I think about it, I'm thinking about the music of the time or the songs that were resonating with me at the time, because that's very much um, at the essence of how I think and how I relate to things is via music. And so I think I'm grateful that we were able to incorporate that into the flow of the book, and I think it does add to the read overall.
So, a couple of things people may not know about Mark if you haven't read the book. Mark was in an Americana band. That's in the book, and I always I say that because I think people there's this idea that if you're in a metal band, don't you only like metal? What are you doing liking other types of music? And I know that people are surprised sometimes when they see that those songs that you wrote about, the beginnings of the chapters, not metal at all. We have Wilco, REM. Who are some other ones? I feel like I should remember this. But some of the non-metal
Yeah,
people
Little
bands.
Feat, Almond Brothers, yeah, lots of stuff in there. Yeah, I mean, I have been pretty vocal throughout my career about I love and respect heavy metal. It's given me a wonderful home. I understand it. I understand the culture around it, the lifestyle, how welcoming it is, and how close the fans feel to one another, how passionate they are about the music. Those are things I love about heavy metal. Um, but ultimately, I am very much a blues guitar player at heart, and I think if you listen to Lamb of God at any length, you can hear some of that influence, and that's cool. But yeah, I definitely, and I use the analogy too. I think if you make your living running a taco truck, when you have a night off on Saturday night, you probably don't order tacos, right? So that's how I feel about music. I listen to a lot of different stuff recreationally, and hopefully that stuff informs some of the decisions I make musically, even in the context of Lamb of God.
Yeah. All right. Last question before we get to some fan questions. So as you mentioned, I run a podcast called Songwriters on Process, where I interview songwriters about their songwriting process. And one of the things that when I've interviewed songwriters who have gone over and written books and things like that, I always ask, and I'm curious your take on this. Do you find that your discipline as a songwriter made it easier for you to write prose? Did you find that there was any other carryover as far as the discipline in that process of writing?
Gosh, that's a great question. I hadn't thought of that. I, my initial reaction is probably not. It's a different lane, I think, for me. The type of discipline, uh, you're in songwriting. You have license to be a lot more vague, and sometimes you want to be more literal and descript in a song. And if you're telling a story, and there's great songwriters that do that. Um, I saw an interview with Jason Isbell where he was talking about how he creates a character and then writes a song around that character, and that tends to be part of his process. And I found that fascinating, and cool to think about. But for me particularly, I engage in a lot of several different genres of songwriting, but in terms of the metal thing, which is I'm more kind of forefront with, um, uh, there's less of that and more of just general kind of thematic writing, and so I think I had to break out of that with the book. So I remember your notes early on would be more description. I want details. What kind of truck was it? Like, what color was that sweatshirt? Whatever, and those are things that I had to incorporate into my writing that could probably help me really in songwriting. So I think maybe as I talk through it with you, I think probably it's the other way around. I think I probably may carry, maybe that was what you asked initially, but I may carry with me some of the writing, the actual book writing stuff over into songwriting, and it might help develop that a little bit.
Well, because if you read interviews with writers, they'll always say, button the seat, number of pages or words a day. No prose writers ever say, I write when I feel like it. There's so much more discipline. But the number of songwriters, and I've interviewed like 400 who have told me, oh, I sit down every day and write, very few.
Yeah, like on, songwriting on my phone, I might, be on my way back to the hotel today and see a person or a scene or something, and it'll give me an idea for a line, and I'll jot it in my phone or something, and then I'll reference that line later if I'm writing lyrics. But yeah, writing a book's not like writing a book's more like, yeah, like you said, butt in the seat and let's get some words down and see what we got. And it is more discipline oriented and less free form. It requires more intent, I think.
Yeah. One more question, then we'll get to the fan questions, because I'm curious, from my perspective, when I read the chapter, and I told you this before, but I was in an airport when I read the chapter on when your daughter died, and I was bawling. And to this day, as I'm talking, I really have a hard time even, whenever telling about that chapter, not getting emotional. It was so powerful. And I can feel myself even now thinking about it, because it's such an incredibly powerful chapter that you wrote. Was that a difficult chapter for you to write? Or what was the most difficult chapter for you to write?
I think that one was, and it's not because I discovered anything new about that situation. I just think that you know, eh, I struggled to honor it and word it just right. And I remember telling you, I don't want a lot of notes on this one.
Mhm.
That was one of the things I was like, I don't need it. I don't. If there's grammatical stuff, I spent some time with that one. I was in a really bad mood those few days. I was, it's so in that sense, it just drummed up stuff. It's not something I bury. It's not something I forget. It's not something I want to commodify either. I don't want this, I didn't want this to be a book about that, but I can't tell my story without telling that, touching that. So it was more about finding the balance of all those things and kind of making it feel like I honored that, but didn't exploit it, and told my authentic version of that. And I think that's what we did.
Yeah. I think certainly the last part of that chapter was it's fantastic and so powerful, and again, and incredibly emotional. So the flip side to that is, what was the most fun chapter for you to write? Do you feel like you were literally not easy, but did you have this chapter that you feel like, yeah, this is fun to write?
I really, really enjoyed kind of going through all the memories of the Burn the Priest era of Lamb of God and then the early Lamb of God stuff, and just really trying to characterize what an absolute just cyclone of chaos and idiocy we were back then. And that was fun to explore and to revisit. And I did a lot of and even with the stuff before that, like my high school bands, I did a lot of checking in with folks and seeing if I was remembering this right. When I talk about some of the early Lamb of God days when we were playing like squats and warehouses in Philly and that kind of underground punk metal scene that we were a part of down there. I had a guy that I spoke to he had reached out via one of my social media platforms and saying he was at certain shows that I was kind of referencing as a touchstone from that point in time. And we got on the phone and I just checked my memory of that show versus his, and he gave me some real insight, and that was pretty cool. I thanked them in the book, actually.
Yeah, and the book, I think the universal element of the book, and I've read tons of rock memoirs, but when I read them, I feel like, oh, I can't relate to this at all. That's not my life. And I think the best memoirs, and I'm biased here, but I think that this when you talk about your days growing up and the difficulty you had fitting in, and those early days as a kid, even pre band, that there's a universal quality to this book where I feel like there's something in here for everyone, because I don't think that the things you write about, there's something in this book that everyone can relate to. And I also really like that about it, that I think there's something here for everyone, not just people are reading it as, oh, I want to read about Mark's life. It's, you know what, I felt that way too. And I think you bring a really cool dynamic to that too. So.
Yeah, I hope it's as funny as it is heavy. You know what I mean? Like I hope I hope there's points where people understand the humor. You know what I mean? I think there are, yeah.
It is, and there's definitely, and I think the Ozfest chapter, right, where you were talking about your day and you have
Yeah.
it chronologically from 8 to 8:30. This is what I do. There are parts in this book that will make you laugh, that will make you cry, all of those things, and it really, and it does. And I read. I mean, listen, I've read this book so many times. And I told Mark this, that towards the end, reading it before we finally submitted it, I was still discovering things and laughing at things that I didn't notice before. And that's really cool to read a book over and over and to still discover those things. So anyway, enough of that. Let's get to some fan questions. But first, again, this is Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Ben Opapari. That is me. You obviously know who Mark is. And if you want to buy the book, still signed copies available. If you're watching on Facebook, comment the word buy to receive a link in your DMs. If you're on Talk Shop Live, press the buy button, or if you're watching on X or Instagram, please purchase at desolationbook.com. Now let's get
we're selling books this week, man.
Can't you tell? Let's get to some fan questions, shall we?
Yeah.
So this is, and these are not book related, so I love some of these questions. Alex from Chicago wants to know, what is the most difficult Lamb of God song for you to play live?
Probably the one that we haven't played in a while. We're about to start a 20th anniversary tour of the Ashes of the Wake album, and a lot of those songs, until we did a live stream during the pandemic things when no one was playing concerts, and until then, some of those songs we'd never played live. So I think for me, I think his question probably means more technicality, and some are more technical than others. We haven't played Grace in a long time. That's a tricky song to play, but really more than the technical execution of the songs, it's more like, for me, the struggle is the memory, and how it goes and how long it's been since, I just having to retrain kind of muscle memory and remember every part of the song. So so the answer really there is, how long has it been since we played it? Have we ever played it live? Those are the ones that are trickiest for me.
So I love this next question from Andrea from Florida. And I'm going to preface this by saying that, the band is from Richmond, and Richmond has an incredible music scene. I'm from the DC area, so we're about a couple of hours north of there. And Richmond has an incredible music scene. I mean, look it up online, the history of the music scene. I was not fully aware of it. Mark goes into incredible detail. But anyone from Richmond knows that city has an incredibly underappreciated scene, I think, with the bands that have come from there, and also the things that are still existing. So that's why I love this question. And like I said, the book goes into a lot of that, as far as the interweaving of the Richmond music scene with the Burn the Priest days. So Andrea says, if I recall correctly, Richmond had a really unique vibe musically in the early 90s that was edgy, angry, but really super cool. A lot of amazing acts came out of that scene. Have you been anywhere in the world recently, including the US, Richmond, that gives you that nostalgia, that unique early 90s Richmond vibe? A great question.
Yeah, super cool question. Thank you, Andrea, for that question. Yeah, it's true. Richmond was really, really special. It still is, honestly. There's still, and I'm a little out of touch. I live out in the woods now and grow my tomatoes and raise my chickens, and my studio's at my house and all that, and I have kids, and so I'm definitely, admittedly a little unplugged from it. But I do know that there is still a really, really vibrant art and music scene in Richmond, and it's just that kind of city. There's a great art school there at VCU, and I talk about that in the book. And there's just this constant flux of like really creative and ambitious minds coming into the city and keeping it super hip and cool that way. Have I been anywhere else? The places that I go I'm there for such a short period of time that I don't always get a chance to like really plug in and like soak up what's going on, like boots on the ground kind of thing. New Orleans for me has always been a source of really great like folk art and music, and just the overlapping of cultures there. And there's just, and even if we're just talking about purely heavy metal, there's a great tradition and a great scene going on there. I've been spending a fair amount of time in Nashville lately doing some work. So much great music there, and really a lot of creative and ambitious and engaged young people there, like making art. Berlin, I have always thought to be a really hip city, with all kinds of theater and Chicago. But does anything remind me distinctly of Richmond? I don't think, to be fair, that I'm anywhere long enough to really get a pulse that I would relate to Richmond. So it wouldn't be fair to guess.
So my follow up to that is, what is it? I'm fascinated by what makes these cities. Why Richmond over any other city? What makes a city have a scene? I have theories behind it, but what do you think it is? Why do you think Richmond? What was unique about Richmond that made that scene thrive there?
I think it had a lot to do with the art school at VCU. It had a really good art school, really good theater program, music school, and then I think its proximity to Washington D.C. had something to do with it as well. There was a great scene in Washington D.C. with Minor Threat, and then Fugazi, and all the stuff that was Bad Brains, and all the stuff that was happening there. And as you know very well, Ben, DC is a huge metropolitan area, just with this big circle in Maryland and Northern Virginia. And so there's this huge population there. And a lot of those kids go to college at VCU, they go to Richmond. So they're taking these influences of like Fugazi, Minor Threat, Bad Brains, and this cool, very specific DC sound and DC culture and all the art and music and stuff that's happening there. And then they come to this much smaller city with cheap loft spaces and cheap warehouses and an art school, and all the things that kind of come with this more kind of sleepier, kind of southern city vibe, and it just kind of creates this environment where you can pile into a house with 4 roommates and have a basement and throw shows in there and have a cheap warehouse space to practice. And there's people, putting on art shows and little theater programs and that kind of thing. So I think those elements really helped develop what has become really a longstanding part of Richmond's culture.
That makes sense. I mean, our daughter goes to Georgia, and Athens, I've read books on the history of the music scene in Athens, and it started the same way.
Same thing.
I didn't know the influence that the art school at Georgia, the visual art school, had on the music scene. A lot of those musicians started out as artists in the art school at UGA, and then decided to play music after that. So I never thought about that, but that's interesting. That art school.
There's other examples too. I mean, I think you can talk, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, and even probably Aberdeen, Washington, and places like that, where I think there's probably a similar phenomenon.
Yeah. All right, more questions. Brent from Kentucky wants to know, when you're not touring, what are some of the hobbies that you like? We've already covered chickens.
Yeah.
So what else?
Chasing chickens. I like. I really love vintage guitars, and for the past couple of years, I've really kind of just really dove into the deep end with learning about, to some degree, collecting and vintage guitars, 50s and 60s era Gibsons, and it's my old man. It's my old man hobby. My wife says it's cooler than Corvettes. So yeah, I play guitar, and I come home and I play guitar, and I collect guitars and guitars, and that's what's kind of my hobby. And I have 2 kids and everything that goes along with that. And what else?
And a dog.
And a big dog. And
amazing dog that I wish, Mark, you would post more on social media. I mean, the dog is amazing.
He got some time last week. We brought him to the beach with us.
I know.
He got some airtime last week.
Okay, so that's similar to the next question. This is Brett from Texas. How many guitars do you have, and why is that number not much, much higher?
I have no idea, Brett, how many guitars I have. And I think I know which Brett this is, and it's less than you. And I would challenge you to answer the same question. Why is it not enough? I like quality over quantity, I think.
There you go. A few more, and I think we covered this. You've covered this in the book, but we've talked about it too. Jean-Francois from Canada. I believe I have my French accent down there. Jean-Francois from Canada says, when you started Lamb of God, did you have any expectations?
No, we certainly did not. And I think, I think our initial expectation, frankly, I think I worded it like this in the book. We were essentially a drinking club, really. We were a drinking club with guitars and amps, and we would hang out in the back room of one of our houses, or the basement of the house I was living in, and plug in and drink a case of beer and make a lot of noise. And that was really what the start of it was. And then we started playing a couple house parties, and then we started playing a couple bars, and then we started playing a bar out of town, and then we started playing a warehouse show. And then and really our expectations, or our ambitions, as I would consider it, were just to whatever the next thing was. And the idea that we would reach any kind of commercial success would have been laughable. And it was so unrealistic that it didn't even occur to us until years into the band that we started getting some kind of like, beyond regional attention, like maybe some first couple like national tours. We were like, wow, maybe we can quit our day jobs for a couple years and do this until it runs out. And then we got signed to a major label, and it was like, wow, maybe we can stay on this label for 2 years and not have to work other than doing music. And then when it runs out, we'll go back to whatever we were doing before, to pay our bills. And I mean, when I say, and I think I've told you this personally, Ben, it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I was able to reach the conclusion of like, wow, maybe I won't have to work a day job anymore. I'll just do music personally, or do music permanently. I think we've lost Ben. So I'm going to see if I can find the questions myself. And then I can answer them. Is there a way for me to see the question?
I'm here. I'm back. Are you there?
Okay, cool. I was going to try and find
good. They'll edit that out somewhere.
I think it's live. All right.
Okay, so you were talking, so I imagine everyone heard what you said.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I answered the question, and I got to looking for the next one. So
okay, good. Okay, perfect. Because that was awkward for me. I had no idea what to say there. I'm not the main attraction here, so I can only fill up so much time. So a couple more questions. And I also love this, and this is from Jacob from Maine. Said, do you have any advice for balancing playing, practicing, and responsibilities such as work and family? So, and I'll preface this by saying, I mean, a lot of the songwriters I interview, once they become parents, become much more disciplined because you don't have time and you've got an hour here, an hour there, and they find that they're ironically much more productive once they have those responsibilities. So I love that question. So I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, so I think it depends on where those things fall in your life. For me, playing and songwriting is my job, and it is how I support my family, right? So I carve out time for that in the same way that you would carve out time if you were a bricklayer or a surgeon or a pilot or whatever you do, to support yourself and your family. You within reason, you prioritize work so that you can make a living. So I do that, and then make sure that I do that within reason and leave time to prioritize my family as well. If you are doing music as a hobby or playing on the weekends, I think it can be just as fulfilling, in some ways even maybe more fulfilling than if you do it as a career. But obviously, work and family come first. You don't want to quit your stable. You got, I've known people that 3 or 4 kids and they're ready to quit their stable job to go out and do a bar tour. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do it.
And then I think,
I wouldn't
I
do
guess,
it.
right, exactly. So do you think then that having that family time makes you more refreshed and ready to go when it comes time to play music?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't just work all the time, and music is work for me. It's work that I love, and sometimes I have to be reminded. And sometimes the people closest to me will be like, "Hey, why don't you just not think about work for the weekend and let's do this?" And I need those reminders, and I appreciate them because
Yeah.
when they come, those they're overdue.
Yeah. Logan from Tennessee wants to know, do you ever encounter writer's block when writing music? If so, how do you get around it? Or is this the thing of which we shall not speak? Because when you talk about writer's block, right, it's like insomnia. The more you think about the fact that you can't get to sleep, the harder it is to get to sleep. So
yeah, I appreciate the question, Logan. Yeah, sometimes writer's block. I can always write something. It's just not always very good. And I've said for a long time, I write a lot of really, really bad songs. I just hopefully let y'all hear the ones that aren't really bad. But I think one of the ways to kind of shake up the snow globe a little bit creatively is to listen to music maybe that you haven't listened to before, or even a genre that you've not really spent a lot of time with. And kind of familiarize yourself with that. And I think then when you go back to the stuff you normally do, or that you're, more accustomed to trying to accomplish, you will have some fresh ideas and a little bit of a different hue, a different lens to see that stuff through. So that would be my advice there.
well, it's always like I feel like when I was a kid playing football, when I was a kid like watching football with my friends, watching back then, they were called the Washington Redskins, of course, not anymore. But back then, we'd watch them play. What's the first thing we wanted to do when we were done watching football? We'd want to play football. And I think the same thing with music, right? Or with writing, that if you read or listen to other music, if you're in that rut, that gets you motivated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think just spending time listening to what other people are doing can help sort of rejuvenate your creative spirit, for sure.
Yeah. So one more question, and that is, Devin from Illinois, what is your favorite riff you've written across all Lamb of God albums?
I don't know that I can just name one favorite. I'd say I'm glad I can't. There are so many songs in the Lamb of God catalog, over 100, that there are riffs that I still go back and hear. We just re-released a song called Another Nail for Your Coffin. We did a remix of it for the 20th anniversary, and I had forgotten how much I like some of the riffs in that song. So I do appreciate the question, but I don't want to nail it down to just one riff, and that's probably good, because that means I like a bunch of them.
So there's a question from X on the screen here that I can't believe we didn't cover, because you're in a band with another published author.
Yeah.
And so did you get any writing feedback from Randy during the book work?
I did not, actually. And not because Randy wouldn't have given it. So I got feedback from Randy, in the sense, it's not feedback. I got insight from Randy when it came to process a little bit. I would ask him, when did you write? I don't remember exactly the questions I would ask him, but they were more general questions about writing a book. I didn't have Randy read anything until it was done. I think I read him one part because I knew he would think it was funny. But no, I didn't. Not because Randy's not a great writer. He is. I just didn't ask him what he thought.
Right. And I think it's also cool, like when you read books like this, to read the book and then go and watch videos of bands during that time. And it kind of gives you a good visual. Like, you know, if you read, you know, to kind of see, like when you're talking about a certain album, going to see maybe that album being played, like YouTube videos. And that's kind of cool. There are pictures in the book that are fantastic, but I've got that video accompaniment of kind of you know, of certain instances, you know, certain episodes of the band's history that have been on video, and you can kind of see those things happening too, and you also write about them.
Yeah, there's a great video of us. I can't even remember if we're Lamb of God yet. We might still be Burn the Priest, of us at a bar in Garner, North Carolina, called the Caboose.
Yep.
And it's just a great representation of what it was like before anybody really knew who we were, and we're just head on down an hour and a half to North Carolina and play a bar, and yeah, that's as real as it got.
Yeah. All right, Mark, are we done?
I think we're done.
I think we're done. I mean, I meant that to be right. I did. Yes, I think we are.
I'm done with you, Ben.
I know. I'm done with you too. Again, the book is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari. That is me. It's available everywhere. It's again, I think we've done something here that's unique, and I hope everyone enjoys it. And that's it for my part. Mark, any parting words?
Just thanks, Ben, to you for doing this, and for, you know, helping teach me how to write, and for sticking with me through this project. Thanks to everyone at Headshot for making me an author, and thanks to everyone watching and everyone that picked up the book. I appreciate the support, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, everyone, and this concludes the live stream.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.